Hi everyone, if you are new here, welcome to the channel and welcome back to all my current subscribers. I am Wade from Black Tie Barn. Today's video is focused on adding expenses and materials to Craftybase. If you are new to Craftybase, to sum it up, it is a full inventory management system as well as feature-rich in bookkeeping functionality as well. It is built for the small to mid-sized business, specifically those who need to track inventory and or make their own products. As most of you know, this channel is primarily focused on making and selling candles as well as other related products, but the tutorials I will be providing for Craftybase video series will apply to any handcrafted business where you make and sell your own products. If you are brand new to Craftybase or simply want a refresher, I would encourage you to check out my overview video, which serves as both an introduction to the software, but also provides some tips to how to get started. I will have that video linked below in the description as well as shown at the end of this video. Lastly, there is a dedicated playlist on this channel for using Craftybase, which will also be linked and shown at the end of this video. Before we get started, I do have a link to Craftybase down in the description. You can use the link to sign up and get started right away, or just take it for a test drive to see how you would like it. You can use any link or go straight to the Craftybase website if you'd like, but I would really appreciate it if you use the affiliate link in the description below, as it does help to support this channel so I can continue to make more and more videos to help you all out. I have been a user myself of Craftybase for several years now, and I fully understand the value that it adds, and I think you will as well. Thank you for being here. Let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start off with a screen share here of kind of a side-by-side of Craftybase. Right now we're at the dashboard, and then I'm going to have a couple sample orders pulled up on the right side. Now, this might make things a little kind of tight and scrunched, so I'll only kind of run through a few with the side-by-side setup, and then I'll go back to full screen in Craftybase. But first, let's talk about what we're going to do here. If you haven't watched the overview video, which again, I would encourage you to do so, one of the first things, in my opinion, that you really need to do in Craftybase is get your materials inside of Craftybase. You use the inventory system of Craftybase to track your raw materials, and then you can turn those into recipes, which make products, and then you can manufacture those products, and all of this all works together. It's like one giant interconnected network of all of these components working together to track your inventory, your cost of goods, pricing, your orders, everything. It's all connected. There are a couple ways to get materials into Craftybase, and honestly, in my opinion, getting the materials in is really step one, other than some basic account setup, which we talked about in another video. You can go straight to the Materials tab, and you can just directly add materials here if you would like to. Now, this is not a bad method if you already have materials in stock that you have no backdated order history for, or materials that don't have any cost associated with them, or materials that you've already written off in previous tax years, and so you just need to get them into the software, but you don't want to attach any expenses to them. That being said, I think the majority of the time, the best way to do this is to not add them directly, but instead you want to attach them to an expense, and that is what we're going to be doing today. So what is an expense? In Craftybase, there's really two types of expenses. The first is your general type of expense. Now that could be rent, that could be utilities, that could be office supplies, that could be really anything, you name it, it can be an expense. And those would be general administrative type of expenses. However, the other type of expense, the one we're going to focus on today, is called material expenses. Material purchases. Those are the expenses that are directly related to purchasing materials that actually need to be tracked in inventory. So not rent, not utilities, not software, but actual materials that you're going to use in your products. And that is really the engine that drives Craftybase. That's what Craftybase is for, is to really track the flow of your materials from raw materials to production of finished goods and then the sale of those products. Preferred way for me, at least, to enter materials into Craftybase is to do it through the expense screen, because the expense screen is going to walk you through adding those materials. And if the material does not already exist in Craftybase, you can create it on the fly as you go. And that is what we're going to be doing today. So once again, if you had seen the overview video, we are starting with a blank slate here, a clean slate. I have not added anything to this account. We're going to be building this up as we go, and future tutorials are going to handle different aspects of using the software. So we're doing all of this together. Now, after I do get some of these items and expenses added in, rather than watching me add every single expense in, I will go afterwards and backfill in so we have some more data to work with. But this is all being done from scratch right now. So let's go ahead and get started. So right away, the first thing you're going to do is just simply click on Expenses tab at the top, and then you're going to click on Add Expense. Now it's just going to walk you through here step by step what you need to do. First thing to do is your purchase date. Now for the sake of keeping everything simple for now, I'm going to assume that all the purchases we're entering in today are just going to be, we'll say January 1st of this year. So we're just going to go ahead and put in January 1st to get the ball rolling here. Now of course you would put in the accurate date, the correct date of your particular order or receipt. Next for the code, this is simply a invoice number, a receipt number, an order number, anything that helps you identify the expense or the order. So in my case, we're going to be using order number R0. So we're going to be using R070202-696. So the next thing we're going to do is in the vendor section is type the vendor of where we got the order. So in this case, I'm entering in an order from Candle Science. So I would start typing Candle Science. If that vendor already existed, it would show up here. Now, of course, this is a clean slate. We're starting from scratch here. I have no vendors. So in that case, I would come over to the plus sign and we're going to add a vendor on the fly. Ignore for now this pricing tiers. We're not going to apply this at this time. In fact, I only really use this for orders, but go ahead and ignore that for now. Let's just put in some basic information about the vendor. Now, I'm not going to add all the phone, contact information, address, additional details, things like that. You can fill that in if you want. It is completely optional. All I care about right now is making sure that I attach the expense to a vendor. So we're going to hit Save Contact. So now you're going to scroll down, and this is where we add our expenses line by line. So let's reference our order over here to the right. This is our sample order. The first thing we're going to see here is a strawberry guava fragrance oil, 16-ounce bottles, but you'll notice we have a quantity of 2 of them. We're going to translate this information from our order into Craftybase, but there's a few things that are important along the way. We're not going to simply add an expense and just copy what's there. We need to actually create this material inside of Craftybase so that it can always track that material indefinitely, any changes. So it can, if we purchase the same material 6 months from now and the cost is a little bit different, it will average those costs out. It will do a weighted average costing is how Craftybase works, and it will always dynamically maintain not only the stock, but the cost or the value of that inventory. And so let me show you what I mean here. We're going to hit Add Expense Item. Now again, we have no materials in this new account. It is completely blank. If we had something, just like with the vendor, you could start typing, strawberry guava, and it would show up, but it is brand new. There's nothing there. So this is why I like to add materials on the fly through expenses. It's because you can add the material if it doesn't exist. So we're going to click Add New Material. Now what this does is the exact same thing as clicking on the Materials tab that I showed you earlier. The difference is we're only doing this as we need to when we're creating the expense. And to me, that workflow just makes much more sense. So we'll click on Add New Material, and we're going to call this, now your naming convention is completely entirely up to you. I'm going to put all my materials into specific categories later. And so if you do that, it's easy to filter all your materials by category. But some people also like to just put something in front like fragrance oil, FO for fragrance oil, and then the name. Or they might put EO if they're using essential oils. What I like to do is just put the name of the actual fragrance, and at the end I will put in parentheses FO or EO if it's a fragrance oil versus an essential oil. The other thing I do is I also include the vendor name, because they might have the same name, but they might be different. There's a lot of vanilla fragrance oils at multiple suppliers that have the same name, but they're not actually the same oil. And so you definitely want to be able to identify them differently without having to dig into the actual invoice. So I'll show you what I mean as we go. So this is called Strawberry Guava, and I will put FO, and then in parentheses, I will put Candle Science, and I just shorten it to CS. I know what that means. And then what I like to do too is in this, by the way, you can attach a SKU, stock keeping unit for this material. The next step is image. I like to do this because I like things to look nice, and I also am a visual person, and so when I see something, it's just a little easier to associate it. So I am going to add an image of each one of our materials here. Now, there are several ways you can do this. What I like to do is just simply on the order. Now, some invoices, some orders do not show the image. You might have to go back to the site and find it if you want to include images in Craftybase. But once you do find the image, just right-click, Save Image As, and then you'll just, I've got a picture folder called Craftybase here that we're going to use for this demo account, and then you just hit Save. Then you just simply choose File, and you go to Pictures, Craftybase, and We're looking for the strawberry guava one, which is right here. When we save it, that image will show up with our material inside of Craftybase. Now, this is where things get really important. Because we are adding this as a material in Craftybase, we're not just adding it as a general expense, we are adding it as a material expense. That tells Craftybase that we need to track inventory on this. Well, you can uncheck this box here that it's not inventoriable, and if it isn't, then it's not going to care about it in terms of inventory tracking. However, we do want to track inventory on this, so we're going to leave this checked yes. And now it says here in gray print, track stock levels and assign usage cost to cost of goods sold. If you are not familiar with what cost of goods sold or inventory tracking and expensing in general, I will have other videos on that specifically down the road, but there are a lot of other videos. But of course, if you have a bookkeeper and accountant, that would be the best resource. Now let's look at tracking unit. So there's tracking unit and purchase unit. The difference between the two is, let's start with purchase unit. Purchase unit is simply, what is the quantity type that you purchase this product in? For example, do you generally always buy your oils in by the pound? Do you buy them by ounce? Most people are going to put ounces here or pounds. But for example, if you're doing wax, most people buy wax by the pound. If you're doing wicks, your purchase unit might just simply be item or wick. The default is item, and that is a singular unit. Basically, what is the unit type that you're purchasing your material in? And it will vary by material type. Tracking unit, on the other hand, is how you use the quantity or the unit that you use when you're actually using the material and making a product. So, for example, let's say you buy your fragrance oils by the pound, but you don't use them by the pound when you're making 4 candles. You use them by ounce or grams, whichever you choose. That would be your tracking unit. Same thing with wax. I might buy it by the pound, or I might buy it by the case, but I really want to track it per ounce, for example. And then there's going to be times where the tracking unit, purchase unit are the exact same. For example, when I'm buying wicks, I just purchase them by wick. Now, granted, yes, you can get 100-pack wicks or 1,000-pack wicks, but because I don't know what packs are going to be available as far as pack sizes, I just put wick or item for the purchase unit. And then, of course, I'm using wicks individually as the tracking unit as well. So in that case, they would match. Same thing with jars. I track both jars and wicks as items only. But in this case, our purchase unit, I don't generally buy oils less than a pound myself. So I'm going to put in pound. And Craftybase does recognize your abbreviations, so you can put in LB for pound. Now, even if you buy in pound, and that is your purchase unit, you can still do 0.5 pounds. So let's say you only buy 8 ounces of a fragrance oil, you can do 0.5. But the purchase unit, in this case, I'm putting as pound. And then the tracking unit, I use ounces or grams. I think most people watching this probably use ounces, so I'm going to go ahead and put in ounces. And so I buy them by the pound and I use it by ounce. Now, here's something nice that Craftybase does too. It recognizes general common conversions. So it sees that when I buy 1 pound of fragrance oil, that actually equals 16 ounces, right, as my tracking unit. It's converting it to the tracking unit for me. It knows standard conversions, but it might not know every conversion you try. So you might have to do it manually a couple times. I really very rarely have ever had to do that. But it is something to note. Craftybase cares about your tracking units the most because that is how you're going to use it when you're creating your products. However, it does need to know how that translates, how that converts from your purchasing unit so that it can track everything accurately. Then if you scroll down to quantity low stock limit, what this field here is simply a threshold. You can create a threshold of when you want Craftybase to let you know that you're low on something. So for example, if you never want to be below 8 ounces of a particular fragrance oil, you can say, let me know when I have 8 ounces or less. That is my low stock limit. The next thing that we're going to jump down to is additional details. Now this is optional. So depending on the plan you are using on Craftybase, you can actually create zones and locations and positions for bins. So if you have a lot of oils or a lot of materials, almost like in a small warehouse type setting, you can actually have them set in bins and locations, and you can track all that just to make it easier to find them when you're looking for them. We're going to skip that because most people are not going to be using that, but it is a really cool feature as you start growing. Category, I will definitely be using. Right now we have no categories, so any searching we do is not going to find anything. However, we're going to create one on the fly here called fragrance oils. So we just created fragrance oils on the fly. And then you can set the status of this material. Is this an archive material? In other words, I cannot use it in any current new products. Nope, we want to leave it active. And then we're going to skip last stock date. This is a brand new material we're adding on the fly, so we're not entering any previous stock taking numbers here. Now, preferred vendor. I actually think this is really important too. And when I first started, I did not use this, but I realized the importance of it. The reason is, well, a couple things. You remember if I put in the title here of this fragrance oil, strawberry guava, I put CS for Candle Science. And that is because, again, you might buy fragrance oils with the same name for different companies, but they are entirely different. Now, if you use preferred vendor, you might be able to leave that off. However, I still like to see it in the name because when I'm looking at my available materials, I don't want to have to dig in to see the preferred vendor. I just quickly want to be able to see it in the name so I know where it's coming from. But the reason preferred vendor is so nice is it lets you know, well, in this case, I know I need to buy this particular fragrance oil from Candle Science, so that's really important. But in other cases, you might have a preferred vendor because it's cheaper for you to get items shipped from that vendor. Maybe they're closer in location, or they've got better pricing, or you like their packaging better. Any number of reasons you could add a preferred vendor. So I will add a preferred vendor if it's like a mandatory, like I absolutely have to get it from this vendor. So in this case, this oil is specific to Candle Science. So of course I'm going to put in Candle Science as my preferred vendor. You can see this time it populated and popped up automatically because they are a current vendor. But let's say this was wax and I was going to add wax instead. In that case, if it's a wax that can be found at 4 or 5 different vendors, there's nothing really different. I might just choose the preferred vendor of the one that's closest to me, the one that would be the most affordable to have shipped to me. And then a description, again, this is completely optional, but if you want to describe the product that you are adding or the material that you're adding here, you definitely can. And that's it. So now we're going to hit Save Material. Now, what it's doing is we created the material on the fly, and now what it did is brought us back to the previous menu, which was adding the expense. So if you remember, we clicked Add Expense, the material did not exist, so we hit Add New Material. Now that material does exist, it's showing here. Now we're telling Craftybase what we did as far as purchasing goes. So now we're going to actually add the expense. So back over to our invoice, we bought 2 16-ounce bottles. All right, so that's 2 pounds. So our purchase unit, remember, was pounds. So we bought 2 of those. And then when I hit tab or get out of this box, it is going to update the tracking quantity. Right now it says 16. It's going to update that to 32 ounces, just like that. And then unit cost, you've got a couple options here. You can put in the specific cost of each unit if you'd like. However, that's really not the best way in my opinion. I like to go with the total cost of that line item. So in this case, I just look back. By the way, I just turned on my cursor highlighter to make this a little easier for you to follow along. But I like to look over at the total. So in this case, the total for both those bottles, so the total cost would be $32.48. All right, and then you can see what the unit cost was. It will kind of back convert that for you. Now, by default, this is marked as received. I typically will uncheck that, and then once I have that received, I will go back to the expense page and mark that I have received it. That way I don't assume incorrectly that I have an item that really hasn't actually showed up yet. However, in this case, we're going to go ahead and mark it as received because I am adding an order that is materials that have already showed up for me. Lot number is really important in some cases that the material might have an expiration. So a lot of fragrance oils do have a shelf life, and you'll have to talk with your supplier, your manufacturer, of what that shelf life might be. Same thing with certain waxes. I won't put a lot number on things like jars and lids because they're just not perishables. Nothing I'm concerned about. But I do like to put lot numbers on fragrance oils if possible, or wax. That way, if there is a particular issue with a batch of wax or oil that I receive, I can reference that lot number and ask the supplier about it. I don't have these lot numbers readily available to me for these orders. I would have to go back to the original packaging of the boxes, so we're not going to put those in for now, but you definitely can, and I actually think it's a good idea if you have that information. So you can see now that we've purchased 32 ounces. That was our tracking quantity. We had none available previously, and now we're going to have 32 ounces available. And then you can add any notes for this particular material when you added it. So we hit Add Expense Item. Now, back on our actual expense page here, you can see that we've finally added that material for 2 bottles of strawberry guava fragrance oil for a total of $32.48. Now, I know that seemed like a lot because I was walking you through and talking about every step diligently and deliberately, and so it really felt like it was time consuming. But remember, we also created the material on the fly, and I was explaining how it worked as you go. Really, this is a pretty quick process, even when you're creating new materials on the fly. So we're going to do one more together real quick, and then I'm going to kind of do a time lapse and go ahead and get a bunch more added to save you some time. So let's go ahead and add one more together. We're going to do, actually in this time, we're going to scroll down and do a jar. And so this is a material. Again, if this was a general expense, you could choose any of these other categories, and you can go into your settings and add more expense categories if you'd like. But we want this to be a material, something used in our products. So we're going to choose category of material. We don't have these straight-sided jars that we're about to add, so we're going to hit add new material. And I'm going to put straight-sided jar, and I believe these are 9-ounce jars. And so you can call these whatever you'd like. And then I'm going to put twist top, just so there are a few differences in the type of jars. But again, you can name these whatever you'd like. And we're going to choose file. And I've already got these downloaded. And yes, it's inventoriable. Tracking unit is just item. Now you can change this to jar if you'd like, but if it's a singular material, I just leave it as item. It's just easier. So purchase unit is item, tracking unit is item, and then of course it's a 1-to-1 conversion. And I want to know when I'm down to, I don't know, let's say 50 jars. And then we're going to scroll down to additional details. Category is going to be, I'm going to put candle containers. And preferred vendor, I'm not going to set a preferred vendor right now because I can get these jars at multiple locations, and so I'm just going to leave that blank. But again, you could add any specific vendor that you like there, and then we just hit save material. So you can see how much quicker that was the second time around, even while I was still talking. Now in this case, this is where you do a little bit of your own math. These are 12-piece cases, so each case of jars comes with 12, and I bought 36 of them. Okay, so just pull up your calculator real quick, and we do 36 times 12. So we bought 432 jars. So 432 jars. And you notice we don't have a purchase quantity here, only a tracking quantity, and that's because they are the same. There's no conversion required. The total cost of those 432 jars was $197.28. And we have received them. We now have 432 available at expense item. So you can see that was much quicker. I'm going to go ahead and do a time lapse and add the rest of these, but let's go back up to where we left off. So I am going to go ahead and go full screen now, so it's a little easier for you to see what I'm doing in Craftybase rather than referencing the order. But as we get to where we're going to sum everything up and complete the order, then I'll reference back to the order page to make it a little easier to follow along. Okay, so for these next couple items, I want to bring you back in here and slow this down again, as they're a little bit different than the ones we had added so far. And so we're going to be adding a wax melt container, which is going to be similar to how we would do a jar. So I'm going to put in clamshell, and if you have different size of clamshells, of course you could put that in there, but we're just going to assume that we have one size and type for now. And then I'm going to put clamshell container. And same thing. And then again, we're going to just leave tracking unit, purchase unit to item, because I'm just going to purchase them by number of items and use them by number of items. And then I want to know when we have 50 left, we'll say. Starting adjustments. So category will be containers. And I'm going to go ahead and put it in the candle containers since they are similar products. And that's, again, a reason why you might want to use different category names. And you can decide how you would like to do that. But for now, we're just going to put it in candle containers. Preferred vendor, I'm going to leave that blank because I don't have one necessarily. And then if you'll notice on the order, it was actually a 90-piece box and we bought one of them. So the purchase or tracking quantity in this case is 90. And then we have $29.88 add expense. The next expense is going to be a 10-pound sample bag of 464 wax. So again, this is still a material. And then we're going to be choosing, we're going to put in golden, brands 464 soy wax. And then choose the image. And of course it is inventoriable. Now back to tracking and purchase units again. I would say tracking for most people is going to be either ounces or grams, but purchase unit, we're going to use pounds. And I want to know when I've got, we'll say 10 pounds left. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and go with 160 ounces. And then we're going to go down to additional details. And this time, a category, you can have a category just called waxes, or you can do one that's called waxes and additives and waxes and bases, like if you're going to use anything else like soap making. For me, I'm just going to go ahead and call it waxes, just to keep it really simple. And then preferred vendor, again, I don't necessarily have one. 464 wax is the same, regardless of what supplier you get it from, or at least it should be. It is all from the same manufacturer. The only difference would be how it's packaged or how cheap it is for you to get it in regards to shipping, any pricing, things like that. So that's why you might add a preferred vendor. But in this case, we're just going to leave it blank. Hit save material, and we purchased 10 pounds, which equals 160 ounces, and the total cost of that was $17.96. And we received it, and again, I would put a lot number if I had one. And then I wanted to bring up this example as well, because a lot of times when you order from a supplier, you'll get a free sample or something like that, a freebie. And in this case, you can decide whether or not you want to add this to your actual materials. I've done this both ways. When I first started, I was adding sample bottles to my inventory. And then if I used them for something, I would deduct it at the time. However, what I don't like about that is it skewed my cost for future products that used that material. So let's say in this situation here, this rose petal gelato 1 ounce bottle is they're going to discount it for me as a freebie, and that makes it $0. Okay, which is great. I get a free sample for $0. If I put that in my inventory as $0, and then later I decide to purchase some rose petal, well, the fact that I had a $0 entry, and I know it's just for 1 ounce, but that would go into the calculated overall cost of me using that material, and it would lower it by a little bit because of this free sample. When in reality, I'm not going to use that sample that they provided me for actual products down the road. I'm just going to use it as a tester. And so I want my actual inventory that's going to stay as usable inventory for products to be accurate as far as cost goes, and to paint a real accurate picture. And in this case, I know that this little bottle is just going to sit on my shelf and maybe get used at some point for a sample. I don't really want it tied to my inventory. So what I would do in this case is, and I've shifted how I've done this more recently, I don't add it to my inventory until I actually purchase the material with the intent of using it in my products. And at that point, I will add it to my inventory. But I still need to reference it here to make sure my invoice matches up. And so what you can just simply do is you add an expense, and you can just put this under anything you want. So I would generally have a category called free samples, or maybe testing or something like that. Let's just call this office, we'll just call this office expenses. And this isn't tied to materials or inventory. So This is just for your own records. All right. So in this case, you could give this a total of 295. I'm sorry, 265, as that was the order, the cost of this rose petal. And then you could just simply say free sample rose petal in the notes. All right. And you can add it that way. So rose petal sample FO. And you could add it that way. And then you can discount it down here, which is essentially what the order from Candle Science looks like. You just enter the discount of 265. Okay, so you can definitely do it that way, and that way at least your order matches Candle Science's order. So if you're able to look up the two, they do correlate and they match. The other example here, or the other option though here, is to not add it at all, because again, you can use Craftybase how you want, and if you're using it only to track inventory, then you don't necessarily need to add it here. Or you can add it, but whenever you added it, you're just going to put $0 rather than add the 265 and then discount it later. My preferred method, when I know that the discount amount is for a specific product, to zero out that product, my favorite method is to make that a zero cost item and then not put it in the discount field down here. The reason is if you put it in the discount field down here, when Craftybase is calculating the cost of all your items, that $2.65 discount is going to be kind of distributed among all these items. And I don't want it to be, because it was really basically giving me a free sample, right? So I just want to knock off just that one item. And so I will change that item to a $0 item. All right. And then if there's tax, you go ahead and add tax. And then of course you add your shipping. And so in this case, our shipping was $154.08. And at that point, we're off $7 somewhere. So let's see, item total $677. We're off exactly $7 somewhere. Oh, right here. So as you can see, this is why you definitely want to check your numbers and and definitely compare it to the order, because I was off exactly $7. So now that we got that right, a lot of you are probably wondering about that the whole time and laughing this entire time at me, noticing that I had put in the wrong total from the very beginning. But now you can see that our totals match: $838.97, $838.97. And once your entire order or expense is created, you scroll down to the bottom, any notes about the purchase you'd want to mention, and then whether or not you've paid for this purchase, which I have, so we put save expense. Let's go back to full screen here now. And if I click on expenses, so now we're on the expense page, we actually have our first expense created, which is our first purchase of materials that we're later going to use in our products. Now there's going to be a lot of videos down the road on creating products and recipes that's going to use these materials and so on. But this was an overview of how to create an expense for some material purchases. And you can see the summary here on the main expense page, the date, the reference code, whether it was paid and received, who the vendor was, and the grand total. Now, if this had shown as not received, this would not be checked. And if when you receive those items, you would simply go in here and click Edit Details. You would go and mark the items as being received, and then you could save it and go back. In this case, ours is already marked as received, so we don't have to do anything else. Now, as your expense list builds and builds and builds over time, you're going to end up with a lot of expenses here. And so you've got some searches that you can do over here. You can search by vendor, Candle Science. You can search for a specific order number if you know that, or a specific purchase date or a specific amount, really anything that would help you find something you're looking for. And then purchase date's really nice. So when you're doing your end of year reconciling, you can simply go to, month by month, or you can say the current year, which again, in this case, we only have the one expense, so it doesn't show us much. But as we continue to develop this out together, we will see this grow and grow, and we can start using some of these other tools like filters and running reports, and things will be a little bit more interesting. So with all of that being said, that is a walkthrough of how to add an expense that is tied specifically to materials that you're going to use in your products for inventory purposes. So now what all that means and how that would all tie together later when we're creating products or components and using the materials in those products. And then when we manufacture those products based off of the recipes for those products, and then we end up using orders to sell those items, all of that ends up getting tied together, but it all starts by having the materials inside of Craftybase. And adding them as an expense on the fly is my favorite way of doing that. Now that we finished adding in a bunch of these expenses, we can go to materials and you'll actually see the list of the materials that we have added through those expenses. Now by default, they're going to be all listed, but this is exactly why we generated categories. So we can look at just our lids and covers, or we can look at just our wax, and of course, just our fragrance oils. But another powerful part of this is you don't have to look for category. If you know exactly what you're looking for, you can simply say, I want my Premier 725 wicks, and pop them up, and there you go. Of course, you can also look by preferred vendor. So if you are going to be doing an order consolidation, then you can make sure that you can check everything that you might need from a particular vendor when you're putting in an order. That way you're saving some extra money on additional shipping costs if you consolidate those orders. Today we talked a bit about expenses and how they work in Craftybase, both general expenses and material expenses. The real power is in those material expenses as they increase your material stock, which is again what you use to create products and recipes. Material expenses provide you insight into your overall cost of goods, as well as the individual exact unit cost at any point in time of any of your materials. It's very powerful. They also help to let you know when you are out or low on stock of any of your raw materials. It can help you plan your reordering of your materials and so on. Honestly, I could go on and on and on. But in short, material expenses in Craftybase are truly key to everything that comes thereafter. I hope you enjoyed this video and have found it helpful to this point. Please hit the thumbs up button below to let YouTube know that you appreciate the content, or to simply let me know that I did a decent job at kind of showing you how expenses work. And out of curiosity, what material are you most in need of tracking inventory for? What is the one material you feel like you struggle with tracking the inventory the most? Thanks for sticking around if you made it this far, and I'm looking forward to doing more videos on Craftybase with you in the future. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.